So, um, let's start with a rather uncompromising paradox. If you want to understand the extreme limits of universal consciousness, like the kind of absolute cosmological entity that philosophers have debated for thousands of years, you actually shouldn't be looking at theology at all. You should be looking at the precise firing rates of sensory neurons in a marine snail.
Yeah, which is just a brilliantly aggressive inversion of how we typically approach metaphysics, right? I mean, we are essentially taking the hard quantitative constraints of cellular biology
Yep.
and using them to solve the epistemological problem of a hidden God. It's a completely bottom-up approach to existence.
It really is. And welcome to this deep dive, customized specifically for you. Today, we are synthesizing two distinct yet deeply interconnected works by Dr. Michael Nikoletseas. First, we're looking at a highly technical neuroscience text, which is called Behavioral and Neural Plasticity. And second, we're exploring Deus, absconditus, the hidden God, which, and this is the wild part, takes those exact biological mechanics and scales them up to a cosmological level.
Right.
So our mission today is to trace a direct logical line from the physical chemistry of the synapse all the way to the architecture of the divine.
And doing that requires us to strip away a lot of the romanticism we normally attach to human cognition. Because before we can talk about the universe, we have to look really closely at the underlying machinery of learning itself.
Exactly.
Nikoletseas uses the Nobel Prize-winning work of Eric Kandel on Aplysia californica, which is this giant marine snail, to demonstrate that learning is not some abstract, ethereal concept, It is a strict biological imperative.
Right, and Candel's work focused on the snail's gill withdrawal reflex
Right.
because it provides a perfectly stripped-down model of the exact behavioral phenomena that govern our own lives. We're talking specifically about habituation and sensitization. But instead of treating these as psychological moods, the text really forces us to look at them as active physical adaptations.
Yeah, that's a key distinction. Like, habituation isn't just getting used to a sound in your environment. Let's say a neighbor's kid starts playing the drums. At first, you're furious. You can't focus. But over time, you stop noticing it. Biologically, that is a measurable depression in synaptic transmission. Your organism actively suppresses the sensory input to protect your nervous system from redundant information overload.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that sensitization is the necessary counterbalance to that. Because if you habituate to everything, you just become blind to novel threats.
You just ignore a fire alarm.
Right, exactly. So sensitization utilizes facilitatory interneurons to actually amplify the synaptic response. Say your sister is mindlessly tapping her fingers on a wooden chair. At first, it's whatever, but slowly it drives you crazy until you eventually snap at her. That's sensitization.
I know that exact feeling.
Right. And what Nikoletseas emphasizes here is the dual process theory. Your behavior at any given moment isn't just one unified psychological state. It is the net result of a brutal physical tug-of-war between excitatory and inhibitory neural pathways. Okay, let's unpack this for a second.
Oh.
Wait, so is learning just a fancy word for chemical reactions? Are we basically reducing human experience to a math equation here?
Well, I mean, that's exactly where Nikoletseas issues his strict warning against reification.
Reification.
Yeah. We have this terrible habit in cognitive science, and honestly just in daily life, of taking a dynamic process like memory or attention or learning and talking about it as if it's a discrete physical object sitting in a drawer in our heads.
Like it's a file folder in a cabinet.
Yes. But reification is a profound cognitive trap. The term comes from the Latin res, meaning a concrete thing. When we reify the mind, we start looking for the mind as an independent entity, rather than recognizing it as the emergent property of biological hardware.
Ah, I see.
He argues that if we ignore the physical instruments that generate our reality, we just fall back into animism. We start attributing physical phenomena to magical or metaphysical causes.
Which I think is exactly why the text insists we dive straight into the microscopic architecture. To truly grasp the limits of our reality, we have to look at the exact specs of our biological hardware. So let's look at the action potential.
The fundamental currency of the nervous system.
Right. And what's crucial here isn't just the fact that there's an electrical spike driven by sodium rushing in and potassium rushing out across a membrane. It's the absolute, unforgiving physical constraint of the timing.
Yeah, the speed limit.
Exactly. An action potential takes roughly 1.5 milliseconds to execute its depolarization and repolarization phases. That establishes a hard biological speed limit for everything we experience. Because of the absolute refractory period, where a neuron just simply cannot fire again while it's resetting, action potentials max out at a frequency of about 1,000 hertz, or 1,000 times a second.
And that frequency constraint is everything. I mean, when that electrical pulse reaches the axon terminal, it triggers calcium to influx into the cell, which in turn causes the release of neurotransmitters across the synapses.
Right.
But the speed of the subsequent reaction depends heavily on the type of receptor receiving that signal. You have ionotropic receptors, which open ion channels almost immediately for really fast transmission. But then you have metabotropic receptors.
And the metabotropic receptors are where the heavy lifting of plasticity actually happens, right?
Yes.
They don't just pass a quick electrical charge. They initiate these complex G-protein coupled cascades inside the receiving cell. And these slow, lingering chemical cascades are what literally alter the structure of the cell. That's what allows for the habituation and sensitization we were just talking about with the drums and the tapping.
Precisely. The fast inotropic transmission allows you to react to a physical stimulus in the moment, but the slower metabotropic cascades actually rewrite the biological hardware so you adapt for the future.
Wow.
But all of this, both the fast reactions and the slow cascades, is entirely bottlenecked by that 1.5 millisecond firing rate.
Okay, think about the implications of that for a moment. It means human perception is fundamentally quantized. It's like our reality is a video game running at a maximum frame rate of 1,000 frames per second.
That's a great way to put it.
Our experience of reality is not a continuous, seamless flow of time. It is a sampled reconstruction, completely constrained by the physical properties of ions moving across cellular walls. Anything that occurs faster than our neural refresh rate or falls within the microsecond gaps between those 1,000 per second frames simply does not exist in our cognitive universe. We literally cannot perceive it.
We are structurally blind to it, which perfectly validates the concept of the Umwelt.
Right, the Umwelt.
Yeah, coined by the biologist Jakob von Uexküll. The Umwelt is the subjective, selective perceptual world of a specific organism. An animal doesn't perceive objective reality. It only perceives the highly specific environmental signals that its specific biological hardware evolved to detect.
And Nikoletseas takes this concept and brilliantly scales it down to the cellular level. He argues that a single neuron has a rudimentary Umwelt.
Yeah, micro-Umwelt.
Exactly. Its entire universe consists of detecting specific chemical gradients, like a dopamine wash, and electrical charge differentials. A neuron reacting to a localized chemical change has absolutely no structural capacity to comprehend that it is currently helping to process a complex visual memory of your childhood home.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's because the part cannot perceive the whole. It is structurally and epistemologically impossible for a lower level of organization, like the neuron, to perceive the higher level of organization, the human brain, that it actively constitutes.
It is trapped.
Completely. The neuron is locked inside its chemical Umwelt, completely ignorant of the macroscopic consciousness it sustains.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we accept that biological premise that lower levels of organization are inherently blind to the higher levels they create, then we have to apply that exact same logic upward.
Right.
If the localized units, our neurons, cannot perceive the brain, what higher level of organization is the human brain a part of that we cannot perceive? Our biological Umwelt simply doesn't have the receptors for it.
And this is exactly where the hard neuroscience provides a structural framework for Deus absconditus, the hidden God, which is just such a wild leap, but it makes perfect logical sense.
It really does.
For millennia, theologians and philosophers, from writers of the Old Testament to medieval thinkers like Nicholas Cusanus and Johannes Scotus Eriugena, they have always claimed that God is invisible, utterly incomprehensible, and fundamentally hidden from the human mind.
But classical theology usually frames that hiddenness as a moral test, or just vague mysticism, like God is testing our faith.
Exactly. But Nikoletseas is arguing that the hiddenness of the divine is a literal structural reality of natural science. God isn't playing hide and seek with us. We simply lack the biological hardware to perceive a cosmic cognitive device, just as a single neuron lacks the hardware to perceive you.
It's structurally impossible.
Exactly. And to clarify how this works, the text breaks down two very distinct conceptualizations of God. The first is God azuktos, which translates roughly to the uncoupled or unyoked God.
The uncoupled God.
Right. This is the primeval, static absolute. It is what ancient philosophers like Parmenides called being, the undifferentiated source of everything, completely detached from the changing physical universe. It does not evolve.
Right. So that's the classical untouchable prime mover, the one outside of time. But what really drives this text is the second concept, God's psychos, the coupled God.
Yes.
This is a consciousness that is inexorably linked to the universe itself. It is built upon the lower levels of organization. Atoms, cells, organisms, human beings. God's Psychos is an evolving consciousness that relies on the physical universe to generate its reality.
It is an emergent property model of the divine. So just as your consciousness emerges from the aggregate activity of billions of neurons firing, the consciousness of God's Psychos emerges from the aggregate activity of the cosmos.
So wait, in this model, are we essentially the neurotransmitters or neurons in the brain of this evolving God?
Structurally, yes. We are constituent parts of a larger cognitive system. We are the processing units.
But if God's Psychos is an evolving consciousness coupled to the universe, that implies a really deep dependency. Classical theology demands an independent, omnipotent creator sitting outside of time. This biological model suggests God actually relies on the physical mechanics of the universe, including us, to function.
It's a huge departure from classical theology, yeah. And this brings us to one of the most difficult and fascinating deductions in the entire deep dive. If we are the processing units of a higher cognitive system, what are the actual temporal attributes of that macro consciousness? What is it like?
How fast does it think?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In biology and physics, there is an inverse relationship between size and speed. Smaller mechanisms just move faster.
Right. A molecular reaction happens in fractions of a millisecond. A cellular action potential takes 1.5 milliseconds. But a human motor response like swerving to avoid an obstacle in the road, that takes roughly half a second. So as the level of organization scales up, the operating frequency slows down.
Right. This raises an important question. If we extrapolate this biological scaling law to a cosmic consciousness, God's Psychos would operate at a sampling rate vastly, unimaginably slower than human perception.
Let me put this in perspective for everyone listening, because this completely redefines how we think about divine intervention. Think about the multicellular organism that is your own body. If you get a paper cut, you experience a generalized pain response.
Yeah, it hurts.
It hurts, but you do not experience the agonizing molecular degradation of a single localized skin cell undergoing apoptosis. Your consciousness is an aggregate phenomenon. You are structurally blind to the microcellular reality that sustains you. You just feel a throb on your finger.
Right.
According to this text, we are the skin cells in this scenario.
It's a striking analogy because it avoids the trap of reification perfectly. You aren't attributing human emotions to the skin cell. You are looking purely at the structural constraints of information flow between different scales of organization.
Exactly. If a single white blood cell in your body feels anxious because it's fighting an infection, you don't feel its tiny micro-emotion. You just feel a general fever. According to Nikoletseas, God would be completely incapable of experiencing our fleeting human emotional responses.
And that leads to what we could call the empathy paradox. For centuries, theologians have wrestled with the problem of suffering, right? If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why does God allow acute human suffering? Why doesn't the divine intervene when we are in distress?
That's the ultimate question.
But this neurocosmological framework basically renders the question obsolete. God isn't ignoring the suffering out of cruelty or indifference. God is structurally, biologically incapable of perceiving our micro-level, millisecond-by-millisecond psychological drama. A macroscopic consciousness, operating on a cosmological timescale, is entirely insulated from the synaptic firing that generates our fleeting human distress. To demand that a cosmic intelligence understand your specific momentary emotional state is as absurd as a single sensory neuron in your index finger demanding that you understand its localized potassium gradient. The scales of organization are simply incommensurable.
It's a stunning reframing of existence.
Yeah.
Really, it is. We started this deep dive by looking at how a marine snail protects its nervous system by depressing its synaptic transmission. We mapped the 1.5 millisecond speed limit of the action potential and the complex cascades of monotropic receptors that actually build our memory and adapt our behaviors.
Yeah, and we recognize that those very mechanisms enforce a strict biological AMWOLD, this perceptual boundary that traps at every level of organization in its own limited reality.
So what does this all mean? By applying that single, unbreakable biological law to the cosmos, we arrive at a perfectly logical explanation for the hidden God. What is so powerful about this synthesis is that it doesn't discard theology in favor of sterile materialism, nor does it abandon science for mysticism.
It perfectly aligns the two.
Exactly. It aligns them. We aren't isolated accidents in a dead universe. We are a necessary functioning layer of an evolving cosmic architecture. We just don't have the bandwidth to see the top of the pyramid.
It unites the physical and the metaphysical flawlessly. But, it does leave us with one profoundly unsettling implication to consider.
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
If we fully accept the premise of God's Zeuctos, that the universe itself is a macroscopic cognitive device evolving over time, we have to reckon with a foundational rule of evolutionary biology. A nervous system does not evolve in a vacuum. It only adapts, habituates, and sensitizes because it is subjected to external pressure.
Right. The sea snail only evolves its synaptic plasticity to survive the chaotic, threatening stimuli of the ocean. Without an external environment forcing it to adapt, its nervous system just remains static.
Exactly. So, if the entire universe is an evolving cognitive entity, what external environment is putting pressure on the universe? What massive, imperceptible stimulus is God's Zeuctos adapting to?
That is the ultimate epistemological wall. The idea that our entire universe is merely habituating to some higher dimensional environment, it really forces you to reconsider your place in the grand architecture. It proves that whether you are mapping the ion channels of a single cell or charting the expansion of the cosmos, you are ultimately brushing up against the exact same boundary, something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.